Hi everyone, my name is Vince Smith. My project today focuses on improving school transportation efficiency and safety through bus route consolidation and operational redesign. I chose this project after observing the process at my daughter's school and noticing what appeared to be unnecessary stops, inefficient routing, and traffic patterns that may increase travel time, operating costs, and safety risks. I will go through the rest of the slides and show you how I plan to change and improve the process. How many of us drive the exact same route to work every day without ever questioning whether it's a better way? Throughout my military career, I spent more than 2 decades improving operational systems in environments where efficiency, safety, and resource management directly affected mission success. Whether supporting special operations missions overseas or leading organizations, I learned that the biggest opportunities for improvement are rarely found in major failures. They're found in everyday process that people have gradually accepted as normal. That mindset led me to observe the transportation process at my daughter's elementary school. And I gotta say, I began noticing buses making multiple stops within very short distances of one another, unnecessary turns across active traffic, and operational patterns that appear to increase travel time, fuel consumption, equipment wear, stress on teachers and transportation staff during dismissal. None of these issues alone are catastrophic, but together, repeated every school day across an entire school year, they represent meaningful opportunities to improve safety, efficiency, and the overall experience for students, parents, teachers, and bus drivers. Before I discuss solutions, it's important to understand the problem we're actually trying to solve. At first glance, it appears that the project is simply about bus routes. However, after observing the transportation process, it became clear that the route itself is only one symptom of a much larger operational system. Over time, bus stops are often added or modified to meet individual needs. While each adjustment may make sense in isolation, the cumulative effect can create inefficiencies that are rarely reevaluated from a system perspective. These inefficiencies manifest in four primary ways. First, longer route durations caused by closely spaced stops and unnecessary travel patterns. Second, additional mileage, excessive stopping, longer operating hours, increased fuel consumption, and accelerate vehicle wear. While each instance may seem insignificant, these costs compounded over the course of an entire school year can really add up. Third, operational inefficiency can introduce unnecessary safety risk, frequent stopping, congested pickup areas, and unnecessary turns across active traffic increase opportunities for vehicle conflicts and create more complex environments for student loading. Finally, these operational issues affect people. Drivers must manage longer routes, teachers must supervise extended dismissal periods, administrators respond to traffic transportation concerns, and parents experience inconsistent pickup and drop-off time. What is driving the change? It's important to clarify that urgency doesn't require a crisis. In many organizations, the change is driven not because something has failed, but because leaders recognize an opportunity to improve before problems become more significant. To better understand the forces influencing this project, I evaluated the transportation process using a pestle analysis. Politically, school districts operate under increasing expectations to demonstrate accountability, transparency, and responsible stewardship of public resources. Transportation safety remains one of the most visible services schools provide to families. Economically, transportation represents a significant operational investment. While individual stop or extra turns may seem insignificant, those inefficiencies accumulate every day. Socially, expectations continue to evolve. Parents expect safe and reliable transportation. Teachers benefit from smooth dismissal. Students deserve to spend as little time necessary on the bus as possible. From a technological perspective, the districts now have access to routing software and transportation data that makes continuous operational improvement much more achievable. Legally, the schools have an obligation to provide safe transportation. Although this project is not driven by compliance concerns, reducing unnecessary traffic conflict points represents a sound risk management. And finally, from an environmental perspective, reducing unnecessary mileage decreases fuel consumption and supports broader sustainability objectives. Building the case for change. One of the most important lessons in change management is that leaders should avoid jumping directly to solutions. Before recommending any changes, I want to determine whether the issues I observed represented isolated frustrations or evidence of a broader operational opportunity. First, I conducted direct observations of the transportation process. Over multiple dismissal periods, I documented closely spaced bus stops, repeated stopping and go movement, unnecessary turning patterns, and route characteristics that appeared to increase travel time without providing any additional value. Second, I sought qualitative feedback from stakeholders. Parents, teachers, and transportation personnel each experienced the transportation process differently, but several common themes emerged. Stakeholders generally recognized opportunities to improve efficiency while maintaining the district's commitment to student safety. Finally, I compared these observations against transportation research and industry best practices. The literature consistently demonstrates that regularly evaluating routes, reducing unnecessary mileage, and simplifying traffic movements can improve safety, reduce operational costs, and enhance service reliability. Vision. After establishing why change is necessary, the next step is defining what success should look like. I envision a transportation system where every operational decision begins with the same questions. Does this improve safety? Does it improve efficiency? Does it create a better experience for students, families, and teachers, and transportation staff? Today, the transportation system reflects years of incremental adjustments. Individual decisions were likely made with good intentions, but over time created opportunity for inefficiency. The future state shifts that mindset from maintaining existing routes to continuously improving the transportation system. Success would mean that routes are evaluated using data, unnecessary travel is reduced, dismissal operations become smoother, and transportation resources are used more effectively. More importantly, this vision is not solely about operational performance. It's about building an organizational culture where continuous improvement becomes part of everyday decision making. Here's my change roadmap. With the vision established, the next question becomes, how do we move from today's transportation process to the future state? One of the most important lessons from Cotter's model is that successful change happens in phases. Organizations rarely transform overnight. Sustainable change is achieved through deliberate planning, stakeholder engagement, and continuous learning. The first phase focuses on understanding the current system rather than immediately redesigning routes, collecting data, and building a guiding coalition that understands both challenges and the opportunities for improvement. This phase is critical because its lasting change requires more than technical analysis. It requires trust, shared ownership and buy-in, and a common vision. The next phase shifts from planning to action through a limited pilot by testing improvements within a manageable area, collecting stakeholder feedback, and making adjustments before considering broader implementation. Cotter emphasizes the importance of generating short-term wins during this stage. Demonstrating measurable improvements early helps build credibility, reduces resistance, and creates momentum for continued change. The final phase focuses on sustainability rather than treating route optimization. The goal is to establish a process for continued evaluation and improvement. Successes will not be measured without a single route change. It will be measured whether the organization develops the capability to continue to assess its transportation system, learn from the experience, and adapt to the community needs. Communications. One of the most important lessons I've learned throughout this course is that organizations rarely fail because they lack good ideas. They fail because people do not understand the purpose of change, do not trust the process, or do not feel included. Cotter identifies communication as one of the most critical responsibilities of a change leader. Communication is not a single announcement. It is an outgoing conversation that builds understanding and trust over time. Because different stakeholder groups experience transportation differently, they also require a different message. The superintendent and the school board are primarily concerned with safety, stewardship of public resources, and community confidence. The transportation director and the transportation staff possess the operational expertise necessary to make this initiative successful. Rather than presenting a predetermined solution, communication should emphasize collaboration and acknowledging that their experience will help shape the final design. Bus drivers, they're incredibly important because they interact with the transportation system every day. Their practical insights can identify challenges that may not be visible through route analysis alone. Involving them early also helps reduce resistance by giving them ownership of the change. Principals and teachers benefit when dismissal becomes more predictable and efficient, while parents primarily want transparency, safety, confidence that changes are being made for the benefit of the students. Building momentum. Rather than immediately presenting recommendations, I began to observe transportation operations and having informal conversations with individuals who experience the process every day. I spoke with classroom teachers, several parents, multiple bus drivers to begin to understand how different stakeholders perceive the current transportation system. While these conversations were informal, they provided valuable insights. Teachers described dismissal as one of the most operational demanding periods of the school day. Parents generally supported efforts to improve transportation, provided changes were clearly communicated, and continued to prioritize student safety. Bus drivers reinforced the importance of practical route design and demonstrated why their operational experience will be essential throughout the change process. The most valuable lesson, however, was not about transportation. It was about organizational change. Because these conversations occurred near the end of the school year, most stakeholders were focused on successfully finishing the current academic year rather than discussing future operational improvements. That experience reinforced one of the central concepts we discussed throughout this course: timing matters. Effective change requires not only a compelling vision, but also organizational readiness. In this case, the beginning of the next school year represented a much more appropriate opportunity to formally launch the initiative, establishing a guiding coalition and begin building broader stakeholder engagement. Rather than viewing this as a delay, I view it as an important leadership lesson. Understanding when an organization is ready for change is just as important as understanding what should we change. Stakeholders. One of the most important lessons from organizational change is not all stakeholders should be engaged in the same way. Different groups have different levels of influence, different concerns, and different reasons for either supporting or resisting change. To better understand those relationships, I use stakeholder power interest analysis. In the upper right-hand quadrant are stakeholders with both high power and high interest, including the superintendent, transportation director, and school leadership. These individuals ultimately determine whether the initiative receives organizational support, resources, and approval. My responsibility is to communicate frequently, share evidence, and involve them in key decisions. The upper left quadrant includes stakeholders with significant organizational influence, but less direct involvement in day-to-day transportation operations, such as district operations or finance leaders. These stakeholders are primarily interested in measurable outcomes, responsible stewardship of resources, and risk reduction. The communication with this group should remain concise, data-driven, and focused on organizational value. The lower right quadrant may actually be the most important. Teachers, bus drivers, parents, and students. They all experience the transportation process every day. Although they possess relatively little formal authority, they possess invaluable operational knowledge. Their support will determine whether the process is accepted and sustained. Bus drivers reinforce how valuable these perspectives are in identifying practical improvements. And finally, there are stakeholders with lower levels of both power and interest. These individuals should remain informed, but they do not require the same level of engagement unless circumstances change. Winning hearts and minds. One of the most valuable lessons from studying organizational change is that the facts alone rarely change people's mind. To guide my engagement strategy, I applied Robert Cialdini's 6 principles of influence. First, authority reminds us that credibility matters. Recommendations supported by operational observations, stakeholder feedback, and established transportation best practices are more persuasive than personal opinions. Second, social proof demonstrates that organizations become more comfortable with change when they see comparable schools successfully implementing similar improvements, rather than asking stakeholders to take a leap of faith. Third, reciprocity has always begun to shape this project. Before recommending any changes, I intentionally spent time listening to teachers, parents, bus drivers. Those conversations not only provided my understanding of the transportation process, but also demonstrated respect for the expertise of those closest to the work. The fourth principle is liking. People are more willing to support change when they trust the individual leading it. Building relationships, demonstrating empathy, and acknowledging stakeholder concerns are essential to creating trust. Commitment and consistency reminds us that meaningful organizations change begins with small steps, rather than asking stakeholders to immediately approve significant changes. And finally, scarcity relates to timing. Through this project, I learned that organizational readiness is influenced by the academic calendar. Attempting to launch a change at the end of the school year would likely encounter resistance because stakeholders are focused on closure rather than improvement. The beginning of the next school year represents a much stronger opportunity to build momentum. Anticipating resistance. One of the realities of organizational change is every proposed improvement will generate some level of resistance. Throughout this project, I identified several potential barriers. First, transportation personnel, budget concerns, parent concerns, technology adoption, and board leadership commitment. Why it matters, and what is my mitigation strategy to ensure we can overcome the barrier and work towards a better transportation system. Sustaining change. Cotter's final step emphasizes anchoring change within the organizational culture. To support that goal, I identified several key performance indicators that allow leadership to monitor progress over time. These metrics include route duration, on-time performance, student safety, parent satisfaction, driver satisfaction, and operational cost avoidance. Together, these indicators provide a balanced view of operational performance while ensuring the organization remains focused on both efficiency and the stakeholder experience. Sustainability also requires structural changes. First, route review should become standard part of the annual transportation planning rather than an activity that is brought on by a complaint. Second, continuous improvement should become part of the district's operational rhythm. Third, transportation personnel should receive ongoing development so they possess the knowledge and tools to continuously improve the system themselves. And finally, success should be communicated and celebrated, sharing the improvements with the district leadership staff, parents, and the community to reinforce the value of the initiative while building support for future innovation. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to your feedback.